Okay, so next will be Genesis chapter 22.
And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of.
It says here now, some time has passed, and now it says that God is going to speak to Abraham, and he's going to tell him to do something. And so now he speaks to him, and in the second verse he tells him what he wants him to do. And this would certainly seem like an odd request. He says, I want you to take your son Isaac and go up, he says, to the land of Moriah and offer him for a burnt offering, to kill him and sacrifice him to me. That would seem like a very odd thing to ask, considering that all the time that's passed, that God has been telling him, your son is coming, and it's going to be named Isaac, and here he is, and this is how the nations are going to come out of him, and so forth. And now I want you to kill him today. All right? It doesn't make a lot of sense at this point. All right, but this is what God is telling him to do. Yes.
And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went unto the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder, and worship, and come again to you.
After hearing this, now, again, if it was me, I would probably be saying, God, are you sure this is really what you want me to do, right? And I'd probably be questioning and saying, that this can't be right. This doesn't make any sense. It says, but Abraham says God told him that, on a given day, and it says it rose up early in the morning and was on his way. Right, the next morning he was on his way to the place where God said to go, and he took his son with him and a couple other men, right, and they made their way. Now, on top of everything else, it's as difficult as this was going to be, right? They even had to travel to get there. So he says on the 3rd day they finally saw where it was they were going. So it took them 3 days to get there. So it was even work to actually get to the place where God told him to go, right? And I will point out to you that it said to go to the land of Moriah, to what we refer to as Mount Moriah. That's on the site of where Jerusalem would eventually be. Right, so I would point that out, right? The same Jerusalem where Jesus went later, and near where he was crucified, and so forth. So this was kind of a special area, and so he told Abraham to go there. The city didn't exist yet, Jerusalem, right? But that was the site of where Jerusalem was going to be. So that's where he told him to go do this, right? So it says he makes his way there, and now in 5, right, it gives maybe a little hint that of what Abraham is expecting to happen or not happen, because at the end of 5 it says he tells the man, okay, you wait here. He says, I'm going to take Isaac up there, and we're going to worship God. He says, and come again to you. All right. So in other words, he's expecting to come back with him, is what it sounds like. All right. He's probably thinking, I can't believe that God's going to make me do this, but I'm doing it, following through on what God's told me to do. But he tells the men, the 2 of us are going to go up there, we're going to worship God, and then we'll come back when we're done, right? So he's hoping that I think that that they'll come back, right? Because understanding that still what God is saying to do is contradictory to what God has said before, right? So, and that's important to understand. God has said all along that all these nations are going to come out of Isaac. So if he dies today, that can't happen. So on the one hand, yes, God is saying to sacrifice him. On the other hand, God is the other thing. So that's contradictory. God can't lie. So he's assuming that somehow or other I'm coming back with him today, right? I don't know how it's going to happen, but somehow I'm coming back with him today. We're going to flip to another part. All right, we're going to read 3 verses in Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to start in verse 17. Okay, in Hebrews chapter 11, which is typically called the faith chapter, right? Because it's in this chapter a lot of different examples of great faith are talked about, right? And Abraham is one of the examples. Okay, and so if you read from verses 17 to 19, it says, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, right, which is what's about to happen here, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Right, so this is what he was going to do. And now in 19 it says, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. Right, so Abraham's thought process, according to this, was that even if I sacrifice my son today, God will raise him from the dead. Right, because God can't lie. So God said that there's going to be seed coming from Isaac, he's going to have descendants and so forth, so if Isaac dies today, then God was a liar. So knowing that God can't lie, he said, well, I'm going to go, I'm going to do what God is saying, and even if I put the knife in him and kill him, God will bring him back to life. Right? That was his belief, right? He says, even if God's going to bring him back to life, God's not going to be a liar, so somehow it's going to work out. So that's why he would have said to the men, we're coming back, because he said, well, one way or another, Isaac's coming back with me, because otherwise God's a liar. So as I said, he's looking at it that way. I'm going to do exactly what God's saying, but somehow this is going to work out, because I know God wouldn't have lied to me about what was going to happen with Isaac. If you try to apply that to our own lives, sometimes, you see, sometimes we may think, well, God wants this for my life, or God wants that, right? Sometimes it's just what we want God to want for our life, right? So, here, Abraham had God directly telling him this, right? So, if God were to directly tell us something, you can rely on that, right? But I hear a lot of times people saying, oh, well, God said this is going to happen to me, and then when I ask, well, how did God say it? Well, he didn't really say it. I just have a feeling, right? Well, that's not the same, okay? It's not the same. There's a lot of things we want in life. We want to work out a certain way, so we kind of make it like God has said this, right? But unless he really said it, then we can't rely on it quite the same way that Abraham did here. Abraham spoke to God directly, and God spoke back and said, you're going to have a son, it's going to be Isaac, all these people are going to come out of him. So he knew something was going to happen, so somehow Isaac's going to be protected today.
And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together.
So Abraham has all the stuff for the burnt offering. He says he has the wood, he has a source of fire, he has a knife. Right, he's got Isaac carrying some of it too. He says the two of them are going to go up, and so Isaac is, again, he hasn't told Isaac what's happening. So he's carrying the wood, and he says, we're missing something here, right? That Isaac says, behold, he says, we have the fire, we have the wood. Where's the lamb? Right? We're all prepared to sacrifice something, and we don't have something to sacrifice. So what are we doing here? And so you see Abraham's answer. He says, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering, right? So he says, yeah, we're going to make some kind of a burnt offering today, but we don't have anything now, but God will provide, right? But until that happened, obviously Isaac was supposed to be the sacrifice, but he's saying that God will provide something. And so he had great faith that this was going to work out in a certain way.
And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me.
All right, so they went up to the spot that was designated. They built the altar, and again, now he's told Isaac that God's going to provide the sacrifice. Well, he puts Isaac on the altar. All right, so I don't know at what point he would have told him, I'm sorry to say, you're the sacrifice. All right, but it says he bound Isaac his son, laid him on the altar, and got the knife and was ready to kill him. Right, as God had told him to do. Right, and so at the last minute, as you see, it says the angel of the Lord calls him and said, wait, don't do it. right? And he says, don't lay not thy hand upon the lad, don't do anything to him, because now you've made it clear that it says you fear God, and that you haven't even withheld your son, that you were willing to kill him because God told you to. Right? So basically he passed the test, right? That he was testing him to see would he do this at God's command, and he showed that yes, he would do exactly what God said, even while having faith that somehow God was going to intervene, right? Which he did, right? He was right there ready to kill him, and that the angel said, no, don't do that.
And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen.
Right, so after the angel spoke to him, it says, now Abraham looked around, and he says, caught in the thicket was a ram there, right? So an animal was right there to be used for the sacrifice. So it says it was caught in the thicket by the horns. Abraham went, took the ram, and offered him for a burnt offering instead of his son. Right, so that so God had provided the sacrifice as Abraham had said he would. He says, and Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah-Jireh, which again has a certain meaning to it, and it means God will provide. Right, that's what it means. Right, the Jehovah part means God, and I guess the Jireh part means will provide. Right, this is that God will provide. Right, and so then, as it is said to this day, right, in the mount of the Lord shall be seen. So he did as God had said, and God provided the sacrifice even as he said he would.
And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba.
Right, so as we said, that this was supposed to be a test for Abraham, right? So he passed the test. Right, he passed the test, and so as he says, the angel said that because you have done this thing, because you passed the test, that that you're going to be blessed, your family's going to be blessed, which is it's all stuff that God had been telling him all along. So it really is just reiterating it. But this was maybe the last test, right? So he proved that he had faith, that he was willing to be obedient to God, and so he passed the test, and so. In 16, because you haven't withheld your son. And 17, in blessing I will bless thee, and multiply your seed. 18, and your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Right? So he's telling him that, all the blessings that God has promised you all along are going to come to you and your family, and now that you passed this test. And so in 19 says they went back to the young men who he said that they were going to be back to, and they returned to their home. And I'm sure he hadn't told his wife what this mission was about, so maybe she wasn't necessarily as worried as she would have been otherwise. I don't think she would have let him go if he told her what he was going to do there, but they returned to his wife and to his family, and they were able to live now and continue on knowing what the future held for them.
And it came to pass after these things, that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor, Huz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel the father of Aram, and Chezid, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begat Rebekah. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother. And his concubine, whose name was Rumah, she bare also Tebah, and Gaham, and Thahash, and Maachah.
So now it says after the events of this chapter, right now Abraham's returned home, it says now he's received news of some other events in his family, right? In particular, again, he's been separated from the rest of his family for some time, because if you remember, he was living in a nice place many chapters ago, and then he left that area and went somewhere else. So he went as God was directing him, so he left behind his family. And in particular, right, if you may remember, right, that this was basically his family, right? This had been Abraham's father, right? So there's Abraham, who at the time was named Abram, right? And his wife was at the time Sarai, is now Sarah. He had a brother named Haran, whose son was Lot, right? Who was his nephew we've read about. And then he has this other son named Nahor, who we never heard anything about. Right? Well, this is him. Okay, I mean, he's not really a character in the story, but as you see in 20, it says he was told, Milcah, she's born children unto your brother Nahor. All right, so I guess Milcah must have been his wife, right? And that she's had like 8 children. So he's basically catching up on some family business here, right? And see in 21 it says Huz was his firstborn and Buzz was next, all right? And so he kind of runs through all the names of the children here, right? And in particular, what we're going to do though is we're going to mention one of them. We're going to flesh this out just a little bit, all right? Okay, so first of all, Abraham and Sarah have had a son, right? And his name is Isaac. Okay, so we're going to add him to the chart, right? And now it says that Nahor had a whole bunch of children, right? But one in particular we're going to mention is someone named Bethuel. Okay, Bethuel was one of them, who was mentioned in verse 22, right? And now it says in verse 23, it says that Bethuel had a daughter whose name is Rebekah. Okay, so he has a daughter whose name is Rebekah, all right? And that's all I'm going to say for now, all right? We're going to leave these names here, and then they're going to come into play at a later time, all right? So there was reason for the writer to kind of flesh out the family here, right? And we're going to find out what that reason was in a couple chapters.